Welcome to episode 29 of the Expert Cruise Show. I'm Anthony, he's Chris, and we're about to take you to sea with our analysis of all your favourite cruising topics, because cruising is an addiction, and as much as we love the history, Chris is a maritime historian of the ocean liners and all of the great stuff from Titanic and Queen Mary right up to present day. We also adore what that kind of ocean liner history has become. Would you say, Chris, that the modern cruising industry is like a direct descendant of those infamous liner crossings?
Yeah, it's like the child of both the liners and of a new way of thinking, because there was many steamship companies that survived the transition from jet to modern day and allowed their liners to be repurposed for use as cruise ships. And many didn't, in fact, and some couldn't adapt, and they collapsed in that very turbulent time in the 1950s and 1960s. And out of that came an excess of ships that, you know, the steel price, the recycling price for recycled steel was quite low at the time, so lots of these ships got laid up. And when some new entrepreneurs had this idea of using ships in a way that made them floating resorts, they had an excess of ships to choose from these various areas where they were laid up around the world. And so you had new people coming in, new players coming in with a completely different way of thinking about ships. They weren't a means to an end, they were the destination themselves. And that actually then pulled the rest of the organizations that were had survived that transition, it pulled them up as well. So you have this wonderful blend of some of the companies that survived that transition, other ones that started as a result of the disruption that jet aircraft created to transportation around the world, which led to the modern day cruising industry that we have today. And
some of us keep those old liner voyages alive by not getting off the ship at any of the stops, because, you know, I said that on last week's episode and a few people kind of wrote in about it. You know, it is interesting that you mentioned the ship being the destination. And, you know, whenever I talk to a non-cruise addicted person and I say, oh, I'm going on a cruise, what's the first thing they say to me? Where's it going? And I'm like, I don't know. And I don't care. I very rarely look at the itinerary. I know where I want to start and where I want to end up, but that's more about airports than anything else. But I like to spend, you know, a solid week or more, ideally, on a ship and just really soak in the ship. And I remember being on the Celebrity Beyond like 2.5 years ago and arriving in Nassau, the Bahamas. And it was so beautiful, but it was so beautiful from the ship, like from this high up position of being on this ship and looking out at this incredible water. And it was just stunning. But I had no desire to actually go into Nassau. It's not a great stop, personally. I don't think there's a huge amount to see there once you've done it once, apart from Atlantis, which is a hotel that a lot of tourists end up visiting. But I think that, you know, the ship as the destination really is part of the reason why you and I love cruising so much, because the vessel is just the nucleus of our pleasure. Last week, we spent the episode talking about cruise vloggers and people who have really kind of shaken up the industry with their content. Online creators who take the cameras on board, film their cruise, or do a travelogue. There's lots of different styles. We talked about the different styles. And I'm pleased to say that almost all but a couple of the creators that we celebrated in last week's episode have since written to us to thank us for including them. And even like Jill and Jerry, the Cruising Canucks, I was watching their live stream last Sunday, and the first thing they talked about was our episode of the Expert Cruise Show where they were featured. They were genuinely chuffed. And so just wanted to mention everybody and thank them for their support.
Yeah, no, we had comments on the channel from so many different vloggers who were in the list, some new ones who we hadn't heard of before, who've asked us to take a look at their channels. On LinkedIn, Paul and Carol were sharing our video with all of their followers, which was lovely. Quite a few comments from Emma. She's been going through, from Emma Cruises, going through the different comments, talking to people who've messaged her. JJ Cruz has left some comments there. There's so many of them. Amy from Cruise Crazed Fam, Adrian. So there's just so many people who've come onto the channel to share in what was, I guess, like an early Christmas present for cruise lovers, because it was the episode itself was fun to put together, but the response from everyone has just been such a joy to watch.
And we should just say that because obviously people wrote to us and they listed their favourite creators and vloggers, and obviously we weren't able to include everybody in the first version of this, but we're going to do future episodes where we cover the vloggers that we didn't cover in that episode last week. But I do encourage you to watch it, list your favourite vloggers down below, and we'll consider that list for future episodes. So we'll get into it.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, this week we have a whole bunch of questions from people. Some actually that came from that episode, because last week I mentioned that I take a box of wine on board, and Jane messaged and she said, thanks for this overview of so many vloggers. Anthony, did you say you take a box of wine on board, as in a 3-litre box, not a case, as an allowed item? So I thought this was a great question to kind of get us started this week, because most cruise lines allow you to take a bottle of wine each, right? Couple of bottles. Now, in a box of wine, and I'm talking about the type of box that you would buy for a party, maybe, especially if you're a student.
Are you talking cask wine?
I don't. Is that what you call it in Australia?
Yeah, it's like inside. It's like a bag. Foil bag inside the box. Yes, we call it cask wine.
Oh, interesting. Okay, well, we call it wine in a box, and we've been buying the same wine in a box for about the last 3 or 4 years, probably the equivalent of around 2.5 bottles. So, in answer to the question, can you take it on board? We just take one of those on board, and that lasts us all week, and we keep it in the cabin. And we, sometimes in the cabin, they leave a couple of wine glasses on your first day. So we have a little drink from it before we go for dinner, but we take the drink with us. And then we go to dinner with our drink, and then we leave our wine glass on the table. And then obviously it gets recycled and cleaned. And then by the time we get back to the room after the turn-down service, another wine glass, clean one, has miraculously appeared in the room for us to start this process over again. So in answer to the question, I think that we've never had a problem taking a box of wine on board. We pack it in the luggage that gets sent to the room, and you can fly with a box of wine. That's not a problem for a pressurized hold. And one box is a little bit more than 2 bottles of wine, so they're not going to argue. It takes up less space than 2 bottles of wine. And the great thing about having the valve and the tap is that the wine lasts all week. It doesn't go bad like opening a bottle might after a day and a half. So these are the top tips, my friends. Get tanked up before you leave the room, and then you don't have to pay the high prices for cruise alcohol.
I have a funny little story. Back in 2008, QE2 was doing its Farewell World cruise, and as part of that, it sailed Sydney, Hobart, Melbourne, Adelaide, Albany, which is a little port on the south coast of Western Australia, actually very famous during World War I because it's where the military convoys left from, and then to Fremantle. And in Albany, it docked at the big wharf there, and next to the wharf was our version of Trader Joe's, I suppose, like a Dan Murphy's, and it's just like a warehouse full of alcohol. And all the Aussie travellers went marching down to Dan Murphy's, and when we were coming back to the ship, you could see these boxes of beer, cases of beer, and cartons of wine and stuff going up the ramp, through the X-ray scanner, because people weren't willing to pay. And this is 2008, so they weren't quite so strict about it. And up on deck, there's a waiter, and he's coming around asking if people would like a drink, and people kept turning around with a drink in their hand or a beer that they've bought from the shore. And he had this very posh British accent. He goes, "Oh, you brought your own, splendid!" He just looked like, there goes my gratuity.
Yeah.
as all the Aussies took your advice, Anthony, and got tanked up on Dan Murphy's beer rather than paying for Cunard prices in 2008.
Well, it's interesting. You know, we've talked about the drinks package before. You need to drink between 12 and 15 drinks a day in order to make them cost effective, unless you get into like a Black Friday sale. And don't forget that whenever you're buying your extras in advance, you can always cancel them, get a refund, and then buy them again at a better price.
Yeah.
So, you know, because obviously there's the Cyber Monday and Black Friday stuff's happening around now. They do have some extra good deals. I just got a deal for Jamie's Italian for lunch for $12.99 per person.
It's on the Royal Caribbean cruise.
On my upcoming Royal Caribbean cruise.
Yeah.
And I also booked the steakhouse, and I think I got that for $14.99 per person for lunch. Lunch is always cheaper than dinner, and, you know, dinner, it's interesting with dinner. Here's another top tip. You know, when people are always clamoring to get a table by the window, there's nothing to see at night out of a cruise ship window. You know, you can just see your own reflection. So really, if you want to have a nice meal, I recommend doing it in the daytime or go early before sunset. And, you know, like some people do on the Edge class, and they go to the Eden restaurant, sit at the back and watch the wake. And it's just a great way to dine. Very romantic as well.
I sat there editing videos actually on a recent trip. Yeah, just because you have that view and it's just so spectacular.
Yeah.
Also, interestingly enough, your comment about not being able to see. I mean, obviously, if you're doing a early seating in the Northern Hemisphere in summer, there is some chance of getting a view. But many years ago on Queen Victoria, we had that wonderful window next to at the very stern that gives you that beautiful view during the day. But we were traveling at night, and it was on the tail end of a hurricane going up to Hong Kong. And you know what's interesting? You couldn't see anything, but what you could hear was the whoosh of the propellers as the stern of the ship came
lifted
out
of the water.
And then she crashed back down again, that big transom stern. Gosh, it was exciting. But last night of the trip, everybody turned up for the last dinner because it's a big turnover port, Hong Kong. And probably by about halfway through, maybe just before the main course came out, the restaurant was half full. After the main course, we even decided we've had enough. We can't do this anymore. And the Commodore Rind came over the microphone that evening and said, just to let you know, it's going to be particularly choppy tonight, so please shore up your cabins, and so much as put anything that's loose in the cupboards. And we're like, oh my gosh, how bad is this going to be? It's
funny, isn't it? Because people like you and I, we get super excited when they make an announcement about bad weather. But it's the same with like aircraft turbulence. You know, I actually take pleasure in a weird sadistic way listening to other people screaming and really, they really worry because the same as on the sea, you know, the bad weather, these ships are built for bad weather invariably. There are tolerances. You know, it's a bit like the wings of the plane are built to rise and fall by 2 or 3 meters sometimes, and you just can't imagine it. But the tolerances are all built in, and we have to trust in the engineering and the machinery that is just doing its job.
Here's another one for you. About 10 days ago, Mary from Alabama wrote in on an old video, actually, The Truth About the Transatlantic Crossing, which was one of our first ones, about going across the Atlantic these days on the Queen Mary 2. And she said, at 9 minutes... Question, why do people always have to have something to do? And I think that's in relation to us talking about the number of activities that Queen Mary 2 has. But I think that the other thing that we should probably touch on is that when you're on a cruise, and you mentioned this last week, and in fact we've actually had other subscribers who have written in to say that they agree with you, you don't actually have to do everything that's in the program. It's completely up to you. And in fact, Libby Rose Embroidery put a message on our video. We're the quiet and boring types as well, Anthony. I don't mind watching others a bit, but you'll find me reading in the cabin, stitching in a well-lit corner of the buffet, and taking a walk around the port. So you don't have to be occupied 24/7 on the cruise. You can use that time to just unwind and think and watch the ocean and people watch.
Well, that's why we were saying last week when we were talking about the new screens that they've added to the bazaar space at the back of the new Celebrity XL, and it's all screens, so many screens, and we were saying that we go to sea to get away from screens. I like to kind of come up with activities while I'm on board. We've been hiding ducks, and we just bought a whole bunch more ducks with the Expert Cruise Show written underneath, and you can tell that it's our ducks when we're hiding them is because these little ducks have woolly hats, and the new ones that we've got, Chris, they have sunglasses on as well that are removable.
Nice. Sunglasses, right? Woolly hat ducks.
So we just bought a stack of that. So we go hiding ducks. That's a lot of fun. But the last time, or the time before we were on Queen Mary 2, we actually were getting very excited about Titanic and talking about Titanic, and we'd just been to Halifax, and obviously there's connections with Titanic there. And we ended up trying to create a podcast about Titanic whilst on board Queen Mary 2, based like below decks, just with the workers. And there, we wanted pathos, and we wanted relationships, and we wanted a death, and we wanted various things. And we did this in like one evening. We ended up not just stopping at the synopsis for this thing. It's called Below the Waterline. We suddenly had like an 8-part miniseries scripted for this idea that we had on this ship. And then we went back to the cabin, and because I have my recording equipment there, I recorded kind of synopsis and intro, and I added sound effects and music and everything. And this was all just in a window of like 2 or 3 hours, and it was so fun. So you can get up to all sorts of stuff, and all
sorts of things. Yeah,
we don't join in with the stuff. I don't really. We do a little bit of karaoke, but we don't really do the trivia.
Actually, I was quite surprised by how much trivia there was on Celebrity when I was on Edge.
Yeah, people love it. They love
There's
it
so much. Yeah, it's. Actually, on the topic of Celebrity, Jackie Byers wrote in and said, so Celebrity removed Eden on all of the Edge-class ships, question mark. Bummer, I enjoyed that space when I sailed on Beyond. And I think what you were saying is that the Eden rather has been replaced on the XL, but it's still on all the other ships. It's definitely still on Edge.
Yeah, no, they're not getting rid of Eden. They're keeping it as it is. But I think that, these ships, because they're carbon copies, effectively, so Edge and Apex are the same, and then Beyond, Ascent, and Excel, they're the same footprint. And so they want to shake it up a little bit like Cunard did with Queen Anne. There's like, let's make a ship that's a little different, just so that people can try new things and they can keep coming back. And so, interestingly though, so in answer to the question, it's only the Celebrity XL that has replaced Eden with the Bazaar and this new restaurant. But the restaurant seems to have an almost identical menu to the Eden menu. And that doesn't make any sense to me. Like, if you're going to change it, change the menu too.
Well, it's like on Queen Anne, they have Sir Samuel's, which is basically Veranda, just with a different name. And on Queen Mary 2, they have Sir Samuel's, which they've had since 2004, which has been a coffee
and chocolate shop,
lounge and wine bar. Yeah. For a while, it was co-branded with Godiva. What I find really interesting on Queen Mary 2, actually, I don't know if anyone's realised, but they replaced all the historic pictures on the forward bulkhead with pictures of chocolate for Godiva. Now it's gone back to just being Sir Samuel's. Those pictures are still there. Someone needs to take those picture frames down and and go back to the ships.
Yes.
I might send a message to my friends at Cunard.
The point that we tried to make last week is that cruising is so subjective, and you really can do it your way. And I really want to impress this upon people, because for me, this is the best thing about cruising, is that they offer all of these activities and sail away parties and deck parties and various things. And it's all optional. The ship is big enough. So if there's a massive sail away deck party going on in the main pool area and it's loud, if it's on Royal Caribbean or if it's on Carnival, these things are loud. But the ships are big enough that you can find somewhere where you cannot hear it at all. And it's really quite clever the way that the sound is zoned, so that there's always somewhere to go and sit and be at peace if you want to, aside from going onto your own balcony, if you've got a cabin with a balcony. It's just nice to dip in and dip out, and I like to go and have a look. I go and have a quick look at the vibes, get a sense of how it is, and then piss off somewhere quiet again, Just, I don't want to miss out, but I also don't like to take part. I don't know if that makes sense.
You like to watch. Quite a lot of the ships. This is one of the reasons why I think it's still very important to have like a promenade deck on ships, because it is a place where you can go to get away from like the activity decks. And so even on modern ships like Holland America and P&O and Cunard's Vista class, even on the Edge class, they don't have a full wraparound promenade, but they do have a section. And the Royal class hasn't got a wraparound promenade, but they do have a section of deck at the back. So you can just get away from the activities if you just want to sit and watch the world or have 10 minutes of solitude. You can do that, although more and more people now obviously use their balconies for that.
Right.
Back in the day, of course, the sail away was this, everyone was lining the decks and everyone was enjoying the experience of the ship leaving port for the first time
because
together.
Nobody had a balcony. That's why
no one had a balcony. Now it's very much it's a much quieter on deck affair. There's usually a party upstairs though.
I noticed that on the new NCL Aqua, because these are like Prima class, I think they call them Prima Plus class ships, where they've taken some of the issues that they felt that the original kind of Norwegian Prima had, and they've made some adjustments for Aqua, and they've taken that promenade deck space and really turned it into an extension of the pool deck. And this is very clever because obviously people struggle to get loungers and it gets pretty busy up by the pool. So they've put hot tubs down on the promenade deck and they've put loungers there, and they're like infinity hot tubs, and bolted to the side of the ship. And so the whole promenade deck becomes part of this kind of pool resort. And it's very clever because on a lot of the ships it is kind of a wasted space, and obviously it's used for mustering, for emergency evacuations and stuff like that. But in the main, it's disused, and so NCL have been very clever to take that space from upstairs and actually bring it down and just spread people around the ship a little bit more. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I wanted to mention, I don't know if we talked about it in any great detail, but we were talking about going for dinner earlier and it being dark outside, and so that's why you don't really need a window table. If there's a beautiful dining room, I always like to face the middle of the dining room, because invariably if it's like on multiple levels, like on the Voyager class for Royal Caribbean, they have these beautiful dining rooms on 20-year-old ships, but some of the older ships are much more what we call classic cruising, where they have one big, beautiful 100%. Dining room. And you and I prefer that, but some people like the newer ships that have smaller, split-up dining rooms, like Virgin Voyages, for example. But
particularly like it when the dining room is full and you have that electric atmosphere, that a big space full of people all sharing in like a joint activity, I suppose.
It becomes like a banqueting hall.
Yeah. And actually, it's not just the Voyager class, but the Vision class as well has these big, and the only one I've cruised on is Enchantment of the Seas, and it's got the grand staircase and everything. And it's so different to the rest of the ship that it's kind of its own special little, huge space that takes you away from the hustle and bustle of the rest of the ship.
Well, cruising should be like a fantasy experience. I don't want it to be like going to a restaurant on land. And you can't go to restaurants that are that big on land. They just don't exist. To have like 3 or 4 tiers where everyone's on round tables and it feels like you're going to an event every night. But we were piling into the Queen Mary 2 Britannia dining room, and I was on table, I think it was 146 if I remember correctly, which I mentioned in our previous episode that was right near Britannia Club. And we just sat down to dinner, and the captain comes over the tannoy, and it's quite unusual for the captain to kind of come on at 8 o'clock at night, because we were second sitting of dinner. That's my other tip, Don't do early dinner. You're literally eating all day, right? You've got to give your stomach some time to recover. So if you eat dinner at 5:30 or 6 o'clock, you only had lunch like 3 hours earlier, or even afternoon tea. So it's funny, at home I eat early, like 6 or 7 o'clock, but on the ships, 8 o'clock, 8:30, stretch the day out, before the late night snack. Anyway, we're about to take our seats for dinner, and the captain comes on and he announces that the northern lights are visible on the port side of the ship. And we'd just placed our order, so literally like the food was being prepared in the kitchen, or the server had gone to just collect the food that was already prepared. And we just dashed for it because seeing the Northern Lights is so rare. I mean, I went to Tromsø years ago in northern Norway to see the Northern Lights specifically and missed them because I got distracted by a steak restaurant that we ended up eating in. But on this occasion, we actually got to see the Northern Lights, and everybody piled up onto deck 7 to the Promenade deck. And it really was like Titanic because it was the gala evening. I was in white tie and tails.
Oh, you're on the deck, yeah.
Right? We're all piling onto the Promenade deck, and everyone's like looking up. And it just reminded me of like James Cameron's movie where everybody's outside waiting for a lifeboat.
Yeah.
But we couldn't really see the Northern Lights with the naked eye. And people were looking up, but actually it was on the horizon.
On the horizon,
and I'll put some pictures up, but my phone was set to night mode, or automatically went into night mode, on a very slow shutter, and it captured the most incredible images of the Northern Lights that we couldn't see with our own eyes. And, you know, people were pretty old on that sailing, and so everybody was like, the lifts were full, and people were clambering up the stairs, you know, with their walkers, and it became this event. You know, you're saying the dining room is an event. This was like a double dining room event.
Yeah.
Because,
well, the captain would also have been on, you know, it's like the equivalent of deck 13, isn't it? Or deck 12. So he would have had even better perspective.
Right.
I actually have seen the Northern Lights from the window of an Airbus A380. So there you go.
Oh, okay.
And you could see it with the naked eye. It was fascinating. The photos aren't as good as what the view was in person, which is an interesting.
It's very hard to describe, isn't it? It really is one of the great wonders of the world. And so, but again, for me, and this is the joy of Cunard, it really is the closest thing you get to the White Star Line. That we were all out there in our tuxes and tail coats, and you know, the women in beautiful cocktail dresses, and it was cold, you know, and everybody's out there huddling, looking into the distance, the most beautiful starry clear night, you know. And that really, for me, was like one of the great memories of that trip, because it wasn't in the itinerary, it just happened. And so everybody was late back to dinner, and, you know, bless them, the kitchen kind of worked hard to kind of keep food warm and stuff, and it all worked itself out. But, you know, these are the moments that I'm sure people have. And if anyone has a kind of moment like that has just happened, it happens with whales and dolphins. There's always these moments that bring people together at sea. Then write it in the comments below and we can mention it and talk about it.
I remember as a teenager on the QE2 sailing up the coast of the US, actually on the way to LA, and we're in the Queen's room. I was on the opposite side of the ship. My mum was by the window, and she sees this whale, and she just yells out, "Whale!" And the whole Queen's room onto the one side of the ship. I can just imagine on the bridge going, "Oh, we need to ballast to the port side to counter the movement of the people." But yeah, there it was, and it just swam up alongside the ship for a bit and then went on its way. It was very cool.
We had I was doing some Instagram DMing with Joe, one of our viewers, who was asking about, you know, doing the transatlantic, and I was giving some advice, and I was saying you're better off flying to the UK and then sailing back as opposed to doing the eastbound crossing for, you know, various reasons, including having those kind of 25-hour days rather than 23-hour days. You know, you might as well get more than you've paid for. But you know, we were just talking about these different itineraries, and he was telling me that he likes the finer things, and normally they travel in the retreat. We were talking about the Edge class ships, and then also talking. He was going on the Celebrity Silhouette, I think, and I was trying to make the point that, you know, if you can get out of your head about this notion that being in the retreat or in the ship within a ship is somehow better because you've paid more for it, you can actually take that same money and go and do a bunch more cruises. And he agreed. He was like, yeah, if I just traveled in standard class, I could then do 3 or 4 more cruises for the price that I paid for one trip in the in the haven or in the retreat. And, I think about how much money, we are giving to these cruise lines all the time. And I certainly give a fair share to the cruise lines every year, despite the deals that I get. But I recognize that if your pleasure is just to be at sea, it doesn't matter if you're in an ocean view cabin down on deck 3, or if you're in the haven up on deck 12. Like, it really doesn't matter. For me, all of the joy that I get from going to sea and being on a cruise is not about my accommodation. And so you can end up spending so much money on the accommodation that you then don't have anything left over for everything else. And so what I was saying with Joe on the messaging was that, and what he agreed with, was this idea of spending your money a la carte for the luxury things that normally come with the haven or the retreat or the equivalent. So things like priority boarding and getting water in the room, and the canapes, weirdly, I don't think I've ever met anybody that eats those canapes that they leave in the room for you if you're in a kind of superior class cabin. They always look like they were made 3 days ago, so forget that. But
it's what's left over from the buffet.
Exactly. Not a terrible thought. But what you can do is you can get yourself a standard ocean view room or a standard balcony cabin, and then you can pay for, as an a la carte thing on a Black Friday deal, you can pay for priority boarding. And you can pay for a pack of 20 waters to be delivered to the room, for example, or a case of waters, 12 waters. And so it is possible to kind of a la carte all these things up and still pay a fraction of the cost. So if you think that the trappings, a bit like the pillow menu, that's the other thing, we get a pillow menu upstairs, well, downstairs, if you don't like your pillow, just ask your room attendant for a different pillow and they'll go and get you one.
I've never once been refused a request for a we don't really like the down pillows, right. So we go with and they're always, because of allergies and stuff, they always accommodate you. And in fact, actually, a previous couple of weeks back, we did an episode about NCL's decision to reduce its solo cabin offering.
Yes.
And Francis D wrote in and said, often a regular stateroom will be more affordable than the supplement, with the supplement rather, than a solo cabin. All depends on the demand and the algorithm. I've experienced this on both Cunard and Holland America lines. So there's tips coming in from listeners now about how to save some money.
Well, this is what Joe said. He went back to Celebrity after I said on last week's episode that I book it, but then I go back to the cruise line and I talk to their sales team and I try and negotiate the price down. Anyway, he told me he did this and he saved $3,000 on a sailing. I don't know how much he was paying for the sailing in the first place to save $3,000, but genuinely that's how much he saved just by calling them before he'd made final payment, I presume, and renegotiating the deal because prices have come down. If you put the time in and the effort in, then it just leaves you more money to spend either on other cruises or to pay for some a la carte speciality dining on board.
I can imagine TVs around the world with cracks in them as cruise line yield management executives throw their glass at the TV listening to you. But I guess a counterpoint would also be, for some people, they might ask, but my time is worth more than the saving. You're spending so much time on this.
I don't know about
and to that. Well, I actually have heard this from many people.
Yeah, that they haven't got the time.
And I refer them to your video.
Yes.
A previous episode where you walk through the process and you see
it took an hour.
It doesn't actually take it takes an hour, but once you get used to the process, it becomes part of your research phase, I suppose.
Right. With a lot of cruises that I've booked, including the maiden crossing of the Queen Anne back in January 2025, I think originally that was nearly $3,000, and by the time I finished rebooking it and changing it, I saved about $1,200, and the total price ended up being $1,800 for a 9-night sailing. That's how much it should be. And that was in a beautiful balcony cabin that was an anomaly cabin that said it was obstructed, but it wasn't, and all that kind of stuff, you know. Yeah. So I really feel like the extra effort is worth it. But, you know, just the way I've always been is like the people I care about are the people that are aspirational about these things. And if you can't find the joy in an inside cabin or an ocean view cabin or a standard balcony cabin, like if you can't find the joy, especially on some of the newer ships, and we've been talking about the Celebrity XL, it is so chic, it is so stylish all over the ship. It's not like the main part of the ship is a little bit run down, but if you want like nicer fixtures and fittings, you have to pay to go into the ship within a ship. If the whole ship is beautiful, then, you know, I've had some of my best times in an ocean view cabin on deck 3 on the Edge class. And that, you know, it's a 200 square foot cabin. You get a full-size bathroom. It's like, okay, the window's not huge, as you full well know, but the locations are great, and it's just a very affordable way to get on some of the best ships in the world. And
I wouldn't give up that deck 3 cabin if we had anchor ports ever, because the advertising opportunity there was just second to none.
Yeah, stick it on the window, you know.
So as we approach our final port of call for today's episode,
yes,
from last week, you know, reading, because I know you've been reading the comments too.
Sure.
I've been sitting there replying to them all, but I know you've read them all. Have you learned anything from our listeners and viewers? Like, which cruise vloggers are you excited to try out now?
Well, I learned that people hold cruise vloggers in such high regard that there is this affinity for people that I hadn't really thought about, because we all have personal relationships with cruise vloggers because they're in our living rooms. That's where we are spending time with them. They come into our homes through the TV. And so it's so sweet to kind of read comments where people are like, oh my God, I love that person, or I love that person, or I'm so pleased you mentioned that person. And that was what I was really kind of moved by in last week's episode, is just this
me too.
Absolute love for the work that cruise vloggers do. And then, of course, the surprise from the cruise vloggers who posted on our comments saying, thank you so much for mentioning me. I can't believe that you consider my work to be as the same standard as X, Y, or Z. And so that was the thing that I was most kind of joyed about from last week.
I think it's also, you just see so many trends of the groups of vloggers that people really enjoy watching together.
Yeah.
So we've had quite a lot of comments where they've said, you know, for more matter of fact, to the point kind of presentation, they like Gary Bembridge at Tips for Traveller, or Emma from Emma Cruises. But then for like the drama of it, they like the Ben and Davids, or, you know, people who've got a bit more sort of dramatic experiences that they share, and having that spectrum, I suppose, of different cruise vlogging styles. It's sort of like people are going to YouTube for a cruise buffet, and they're choosing bits from here and there to get the different experiences. And to see the number of people who had very similar feelings about the various vloggers for their different styles and the different things they've learnt from people. And then, of course, there are some who have mentioned vloggers that we obviously hadn't. We are two people. We can't watch everyone all the time. Otherwise, we'd never do anything else in our lives. But you know, some of the ones that we might have missed, and how passionate people are about those ones. You know, your Lalita Locas or Don's Cruising Vacations, which obviously now we will obviously put higher on our radar to check out.
Sure. Well, we'll mention them next time. Yeah. I mean, I did post an image of BrightSunTravels, and that's Jake, and another Canadian. He's one of my favorites. He just does a beautiful job. But he doesn't just do cruises. He does hotels and theme parks.
No, his Abandoned series is wonderful.
That's right, Abandoned. So
that's where I found him. Yeah.
He really is a wonderful filmmaker, and he spent more money getting his upgrade on the Queen Mary 2 than I don't even know where that money comes from. He was like, we upgraded to the grand duplex on Queen Mary 2, And I was like, you guys are kids. Like, where are these funds coming from? It's so wonderful.
Well, have you seen his views? That's where they're coming from.
Well, exactly. But I love the fact that he felt that it was important enough to spend that kind of money on. And he had an absolutely great time. And I really do recommend Jake's video there on BrightSunTravels. He has BrightSun Films as well.
Do you know the one that made me laugh out loud, like literally start laughing?
What was that?
Was No Pants Profits, who sent a message saying, troublemaker checking in.
That's right,
You told everyone he was a troublemaker.
Yeah, well, he knows it too. You know, he's very smart, that guy, Richard. Very smart.
He replied to, I said, Anthony's probably watching your video right now or something like that. And he replied and said, I'm actually going to cause trouble at the world's largest theme park convention this week. They gave me a press access for some reason, so I wonder how he's going with that. You
know, often people start with cruises or they start with hotels and they switch to cruises. But if you fall in love with a vlogger, then you're going to watch whatever it is that they do. And that's the joy of it, I think, is that you really can learn about areas and topics that you might not really have thought you'd be interested in just because you like following the vlogger around the world.
So do you remember what, I mean, it was only yesterday, what I was really excited about?
Which one was that?
When I saw that Jeb Brooks
from
Greener Grass, he had replied to, he'd left a message on our channel actually thanking us for including him. But not only that, Anthony, he's a public subscriber.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
I was fanboying.
Yes. Well, we were recommending to people that they follow all the vloggers and that they subscribe and hit the bell and all that kind of stuff. But we also should remind you that you need to do that for this channel too. And
yes, please.
It's really important because I know that Chris is keen to hit the 50,000 subscriber marker. We're getting close. So if you haven't subscribed, please do. Sign up for notifications, really important, and become part of this expert cruise community.
Yeah, and you know, at the beginning of the year, I had this 50,000 subscriber goal, and it looked so unachievable. But with everybody's support here, but also a huge thank you to you, Anthony, for all of the effort you've put in to help me raise the standards of this channel, and it's something that we're really proud of now. I think it might be achievable, so it'd be great if you're in the first 50. That would be really exciting. Also, a quick shout out to a few other people who've left us messages. We had Taste Trekker Tales, who left us a message and said that they're relatively new cruise vloggers and they hope to be on our list one day in the future, but they have a few favorites and they've listed some of theirs. Pearl and Brian, Tips and Adventures and Traveling. Light Lisa, they think they're both brilliant, and that was nice to hear from them as well. People who are just starting out, looking at us, and then obviously we're looking at everyone else. So it's nice that community sort of like supports itself and everybody lifts each other up, which I think is one of the really lovely things about our experience here so far, is that it has been such a positive experience, and I hope it stays that way, because it is kind of like taking that positive cruise experience where everyone puts their guard down a little bit on the ships and starts to interact in a way that's much more normal human interaction that we see in many everyday life experiences. If that can stay in this community, that really does allow you to take the cruise home with you.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, well, listen, thanks for joining us this week. Subscribe, join us next week for more from the Expert Cruise Show. Have a great week. Bye for now.